So we're pleased today to have Colonel John Buldoc with us. Colonel Buldoc currently serves as the Superintendent of the Nebraska State Patrol. He oversees the operations and activities of some, hope my number is right, 750 officers and staff. They're obviously spread across the state. Colonel Buldoc comes to us from San Diego, where the temperature is about the same as, no, not quite the same as here. He was the chief of police at the United Port of San Diego. And prior to his service in San Diego, he spent 25 years law enforcement in various capacities in Minnesota, including time as the chair of the Minnesota Board of Police Officers Standards and Training. Colonel Buldoc.
Thank you. Well, thanks for being here today. It's always a privilege to come and speak to students here at UNL. And I see we have some faculty too. So the best part is always the question answer. So that's a hint. So at the end, we'd love to hear your questions, what's on your mind. So it's always a privilege for me to come and talk about our organization, the Nebraska State Patrol. It's a unique agency that has a lot of duties that some people might not realize. You think of state troopers as, it's those people who pull me over when I'm going too fast on the interstate, right? Well, we do that, okay, I promise that. All right, but there's a lot of other things we do. We are one of only 49 statewide law enforcement agencies in the country. Can anybody tell me which state does not have a statewide police agency? No, Alaska has one. Alaska State Troopers, they have their own TV show. It's really cool. Hawaii, right, Hawaii only has municipal policing, does not have a state police agency. So you win the prize. What's the prize, Doc? We'll come up with something. Yeah, that's right. So in most state police organizations, we have a wide variety of functions. So here in Nebraska, we function more like a state police agency in that we have patrol, which is the folks in the uniform who are driving around making sure that you're all driving safely, right? We have investigators who handle all of the serious crimes around the state. Typically, it would be investigating homicides, drug crimes, serious felonies in our smaller communities where our local sheriffs or police departments may not have the capacity or expertise. So we view ourselves very much as the experts who come alongside our partner agencies to help out with those kind of crimes. And of course, we have a number of civilian staff who support us. We have dispatchers, you might imagine, like most law enforcement agencies do. And we have our own crime lab where we provide services to the entire state for forensic analysis of drugs, blood evidence, so blood alcohol testing is done there. We do what we call the physical sciences, so like gunshot residue, ballistics testing, tire tracks, footprints, fingerprints, of course. And then we have an entire army of people who all they do is categorize fingerprints for background investigations. We have 75 people who do that. So if you work in a daycare or in certain aspects of the medical field, you have to pass a fingerprint background check. So that's one of the things that we do on behalf of all of the law enforcement agencies in the state. And of course, we're connected to the FBI and other federal agencies in order to properly identify people. So if someone's arrested for a crime, they're charged and convicted, they get a criminal history, and that includes the right information being attached to that person's fingerprint, so that if they become a repeat offender, which happens sometimes, believe it or not, somebody might move to another state, commit a crime there, it's really important that that criminal history attaches to the right person so that we know in case of sentencing enhancement or in the case of a serial criminal, we'll be able to properly identify that person and make sure that they get the appropriate attention from the criminal justice system. So that whole aspect of this fingerprint world goes on behind the scenes that a lot of people don't see unless you happen to need to go there to get a background check. And there are a lot of jobs that require background checks. So that's just another element. So we have the normal cool law enforcement stuff, which I'm going to show a little video, which is a little bit of a shameless recruiting plug, but after all, that's what I get to do, part of my job. So this is going to be all the glamorous stuff because I'm not going to show you a 5-minute video that shows the boring part of the job, okay? So just bear with me, and we'll get this going here. I didn't pick the music, all right?
Part of our training is to start to socialize these people into the norms and the values of the Nebraska State Patrol. With everything that we're asking them to do, they come together as a group and accomplish a lot of the things and the tasks that we put in front of them as they go through the training cycle over the next 22 weeks.
Well, I'm a Nebraska State Trooper, something I've always wanted to do. The Nebraska State Patrol, I did thorough research prior to joining the agency, and it just seemed like it'd be a good fit for me.
There's so many opportunities within the agency that I can pretty much do anything and everything I want.
Get in there. Hey, Tom, let's go. Let's go. Oh, there you go.
The State Patrol is the best of the best. There are only 49 like agencies.
She passed the quiz, by the way.
It's a bigger deal. You get better training, more camaraderie. It's just where I wanted to be.
I've been in law enforcement in the military. I was security forces in the Air Force before I got out of active duty. I've always liked being in law enforcement and decided to get back into it, and the State Patrol just felt like the right spot for me.
They take charge when they roll onto a scene. People look to the state trooper. From the city guys, they look to the state trooper for help first.
Stop moving! Stop moving!
I'll start off when I was about 4 or 5 years old.
Don't worry.
I've always looked up to policemen, wanted to be a cop. I have 2 family members that were troopers, so as I kind of grew up and got into college, finished college, decided to go through with my career. State Patrol was my #1 choice.
It's the discipline and how they handle everything, and they do everything the right way. It's all about doing the right thing and not making stuff up as you go along.
Put your hands up, drop the gun! Drop it!
I actually come from history of law enforcement. My father was a trooper in Kansas for 20 years. For me, the biggest thing is it's something different and exciting every single day. You never know what you're going to get into. You're outside, you're on your feet, you're helping people do whatever it is, and there's no one day that's the same as the next.
Make my community a safer place, make my state a safer place, and make sure that I'm doing everything I can to keep my family safe.
Where are you going?
Broken Bow.
Is that where you wanted to go?
Yes. Going to Troop A in Omaha.
Is that where you wanted to go?
That is exactly where I wanted to go.
I'm going to Troop H Lincoln.
Okay. Is that where you wanted to go?
That is exactly where I wanted to go.
Push motto! Sound off! Let it go! Serve it right!
Congratulations to each of you, troopers of the 61st Basic Recruit Class of the Nebraska State Patrol.
Okay, so that kind of is just a high-level overview of kind of what it's like at camp. So we hire a lot of men and women who come out of the military, who come out of college, some who come from previous backgrounds in law enforcement, and we put them through a 6-month academy. And it's very technical in terms of the physical skills. You know, this job can be physically demanding from time to time, so we spend a lot of time training in those aspects. Search and seizure, Fourth Amendment, First Amendment, so that when our folks come out, we want them to be prepared for success in the things that they may encounter as a law enforcement officer. And I always frame it this way: being a law enforcement officer, you have a front row seat to life, meaning the good, the bad, and the ugly. And sometimes there's a lot of bad and ugly, but there's a lot of good out there too. And it's a great career in which you get to serve people. And we have to remind ourselves that first and foremost, we're public servants. We get paid to help safeguard our communities, help people in need, and if you look at the statistics, probably 2/3 or more of what any law enforcement officer does is respond to calls for service. That's not necessarily connected to arresting a bad guy or investigating a crime. It's everything from I'm lost, I have a lost kid, I have a lost dog, I have a dispute with my neighbor, I've been involved in a vehicle accident. It's more of the service-related stuff. That is literally 2/3 of what we do. Motorist assist, somebody's broken down on the side of the road, and we're gonna help them out, get them to their location, call a tow truck for them. So very much service-oriented. The high-action stuff that you see, like in this recruiting video, because a lot of people like that aspect of it, but the driving cars really fast or going to some dramatic crime scene, those things do happen, but that's not an everyday thing. So we want to make sure that when we're recruiting, when we're talking about law enforcement, we really want to talk about it in terms of service is the #1 aspect of this job. And sometimes what you see on TV is not, believe it or not, an accurate representation of what a day in the life of a police officer is like. So we don't wrap up every crime by 8:30, by the end of the show. So sometimes it takes years and years. In fact, there was a case that I worked when I was a detective many years ago. I forgot how many years ago. Probably it was 1990. There was a case that I worked on, a missing person. And I went on to a different organization, and one of my partners picked up that case and was working that case. And then she got promoted and eventually left the agency, and then somebody else that I had trained in many years ago took over that case, and he's now a captain in that police agency, and that's still an unsolved missing person case. So that's going on 30-some years, but you have cases like that that just don't ever go away. And there are other cases where we may have solved it and got it to a conclusion, but it never goes away up here, right? So sometimes there's some trauma that we deal with and some things that we can't unsee that kind of carry you your entire career. The nice thing is that today we are much more mature as an industry in terms of taking care of our people. We call it wellness programs, officer wellness programs. It's much more routine now to have officers go through trauma counseling after being exposed to a traumatic incident, having access like peer counselors, chaplains, access to psychological services, much like we've seen with our military vets. They get exposed to trauma. It does things to your brain that are not necessarily healthy, but there's ways you can treat that. So we've discovered that in law enforcement it's the same way. When I started in 1986, I remember I dealt with the first time I dealt with the death of a child. That's not a normal experience for a 21-year-old, and that incident will be with me forever. And we didn't have the kind of counseling and follow-up care that we do today. So the point in raising that is when you become a law enforcement officer, so we as the hiring agency, we bring you on board, we hire everything about you. Your past, your present, your potential, and we have to keep in mind that the mental health of our team is just as important as the physical health. And that's something that unfortunately law enforcement is a little bit late to the game, but I think we're getting much better at it now than certainly were 30 years ago. So let me see if I understand our audience here. How many freshmen do we have today? How many are absolutely certain of what you're going to do with the rest of your life? Oh, okay, yeah, that's about normal, right? How many upperclassmen, juniors or seniors? Okay, don't be bashful. You've earned that, okay? Yeah, it's a lot of hard work. So as you get closer to the end of your academic career, now you get to be in the, okay, what am I going to do? What direction am I going to go? There's a lot of choices out there. And let's just talk about the field of law enforcement, since that happens to be, I guess, my area of expertise. There are lots of options for young men and women coming out of college, and especially women. Our population is about 50-50, right? So nationwide, about 16% of law enforcement officers are female. That's a little underrepresented, okay? So I always want to encourage young women to look at law enforcement as a career field. It's It's one where it's not like it was 30 years ago. I think we've taken great strides in embracing diversity in law enforcement, not only in terms of gender diversity, but certainly in racial and ethnic diversity. We've realized over the years that if your law enforcement agency doesn't represent the community it serves, there's automatically a trust barrier there. So that's an area where we've become much more intentional. But I would look at some of the women who I've worked with in my career and say, look, sometimes it's a hard balance with other commitments. For some people, it's family. For some people, it's other things. But I look at, we have more women now leading law enforcement agencies in this country than we ever have. In Seattle, in Philadelphia, in some of our major cities, we now have women leading those agencies. So it's a short step from day one to 25 years down the road in your career, and you have an opportunity to lead a law enforcement agency. And I think that's a great opportunity, and it's a chance to kind of resettle history where that was completely unheard of 30 years ago. So we've made strides, but we have a lot further to go, in my opinion. So I am going to ramble on, and I could show you some more videos, but what I really like to do is give you an opportunity to ask some questions, because you're all the smart academic types here, I can tell that. And you weren't all bribed here with just extra credit, right? You're actually here because you want to know something? All right. So I'll be happy to answer a question, and if I don't know the answer, I will get back to you. Or I'll just make it up, okay? How's that? No, I won't do that. Ma'am.
You said that there was that case going on for 30 years. What does it take for a case to be like a cold case?
Oh, that's a great question. So she asked, what's the definition of a cold case when I referenced that case that was 30 years old? Cold case is really just kind of a term that we use where there's no longer active leads or new leads, right? But when you look at a missing person or a homicide, the case is never really closed, right? There's always somebody assigned to that case. There's always somebody, probing for new leads, new information, and we have several of those cases here in Nebraska. The cold case is really a reference to we don't have any fresh information. But sometimes we go back and we look at the existing information and we just look at it through a different lens and go, wait a second, there might be a connection there. And sometimes it's helpful to bring in somebody totally disconnected with that case, look at it with a fresh set of eyes, and sometimes they can see things or potential links that weren't previously explored. And we see a lot of cases resolved that way. And we see with the advancements in technology, especially with DNA, we have evidence that has been preserved many years ago, reevaluated with different scientific techniques, pulling out DNA evidence that was not previously discoverable because of the technology at the time. So those are things that we can bring to bear. And of course, working together, I always say that teamwork is one of the most essential aspects of law enforcement. We have to work together as a team. It's a team sport, not only within our agencies, but in a case like that, if the forensic testing exceeds our ability, we'll go to the FBI or other agencies to see if there are other techniques that we can bring to bear. So sometimes it requires a great deal of teamwork across state, federal, local agencies to bring about successful resolutions. Excellent question. Yes, ma'am. Yes, unfortunately, the supply of labor is often overwhelmed by the demand for the service, right? So her question was, does a person working a cold case have other cases? Yes. Oftentimes, they have many, many other cases. And so they'll devote a certain amount of time. So you have a new case that comes in that has fresh evidence, fresh witnesses. You need to get after that right away because people's memories get a little funky after a while and evidence can degrade. So they have to work the new cases first, and then as time permits, work on those cold cases, because again, that's not going to, the status of that case isn't going to change. So sometimes it has to be a lot more deliberate, and you have to take the long view of it. Like, this might take me several years to figure this one out, or wait for that one break where someone comes forward and says, hey, I remember something. you know, and this person had a connection to that person, and then that's just another lead to track down. Now, sadly, some of those cases never get solved, and that's a shame, because when you have a missing person or a homicide, you have not only the victim, but you have the victim's family, the victim's friends. There's a huge tail on those cases that impact a lot of people, and so the burden on the investigator, there's a lot of stress involved with that, because there's a lot of things to consider, you know, trying to get that thing right and make sure you have a prosecutable case that won't get kicked on appeal. And it's very hard without physical evidence sometimes, or without a lot of physical evidence. So those are all factors that weigh in on the investigator who are working on those cases. Yes, ma'am?
You kind of touched on this a little bit, but can you talk about just the relationships you guys have with like local and federal agencies and kind of how that communication works?
Yes, absolutely. That's one of my favorite aspects of this career, is just the teamwork involved. So we participate in several different task forces around the state, which have local officers from a sheriff's office, police department, and federal agencies. For example, the DEA, FBI. We have a task force up in South Sioux City, which is a U.S. Marshals task force, and their job is to go and find bad guys who are trying to hide out. Why they all come to Nebraska, I don't know, but they seem to be a lot of them here, and that's a fun segue, because we have another task force that it's a technical crimes unit. All they do is try to solve cases using technology. So they will scrub social media. The U.S. Marshals was looking for this one bad guy who had stabbed a couple people and shot at some law enforcement officers in another state and was hiding out in Nebraska again. It's like, they think they can't be found here? Newsflash. So one of our technical crimes experts said, hey, if you can tell me this guy's IP address from where he's from, you get me that, and I'll find this guy within 5 hours. And I'm like, no way. Yeah. So the local agency from where this guy was from found the IP address that this guy was using back in his home state, and found out that he was accessing a certain website from is like a cousin's computer in a town in the middle of Nebraska. Like, it was like in Paxton or someplace where you wouldn't expect a criminal. Anybody from Paxton? Great hunting and fishing out there, by the way. We found the guy within 8 hours. And the marshals had no idea that we had this technology. And speaking of technology, that's one that there's a lot of skepticism about law enforcement and technology, right? The fight between Apple and the FBI, anybody been following that? Like, ooh, privacy rights versus protecting the public, right? I mean, that's a great debate to have, right? What side should we fall on? You know, I mean, I feel strongly both ways. I mean, I don't want the big authorities, right, to know everything about me, right? But yet we might have terrorists or other bad guys using technology. All the drug dealers now are communicating on WhatsApp, right? And you know, at first I was like, WhatsApp, huh? I think that's how they named it. But it's encrypted. We can't. Well, I could get a wiretap from a federal judge based on probable cause, but I can't listen because it's encrypted. So, there's a dilemma, right? So if you have probable cause and you have a warrant, you have a wiretap or something, but the bad guys are using more enhanced communication than we have the ability to tap into, what do we do? You know? So I don't have the answer. If I did, I'd write a book and make $1 million, I think. But it's a debate that's worth having, right? So as technology evolves, we have to adapt to it. And it's not a challenge that I thought I'd be looking at 30 years ago, right? But it's right there for us. But as you've learned, probably in some of your basic criminal law classes, the government has this thing called balancing of interests, right? And we always have to be looking at that. Our lawmakers, our courts have to look at this balancing of interests to see what side do we fall on. And the jury's still out on that one, pun intended. And we'll see how it comes out. But somewhere in there, perhaps there's a happy median without the government having to tell Apple or some other technology company that you must do this and you must do that. So we'll see how that one progresses. Other questions? Yes, ma'am.
During those 22 weeks, do the police
Yes, yes, as a matter of fact, yes. Thank you, great question. So is there like diversity training, anti-bias training, those kind of things? Yes, that's actually mandated by the state. We have a state law that talks about education of police officers, make sure that they have an understanding about bias policing. Another term that is taught about in that program is unconscious bias, or what's the other term? Implicit bias, thank you. So that's something like, well, of course, most people are going, well, I don't have a bias, Oh, are you sure? So we talk about that. Based on your experience, where I grew up, I was a white kid from a white suburb of Minneapolis. There wasn't a lot of diversity where I lived. And so, of course, I don't have a bias, It just was outside of my experience. But I moved to a town in the middle of nowhere, Minnesota, to go to college at Bemidji State University. Anybody ever heard of that? Yeah, awesome, go Beavers. Happened to be sandwiched between 3 of the largest Native American reservations in the state of Minnesota. I experienced for the first time racism. And I'm like, what? So it was an eye-opener for me. Some of the things that I saw and experienced were completely outside of my experience as a young person. And I saw the dynamics at play in that community, and it taught me some valuable lessons. So we can't assume that just because somebody comes from this background or that background, that they don't have a bias, whether it be implicit bias or something that was developed by some experience. So it's important that we train officers on that, and that's a mandatory course in the academy. And in fact, we do refresher training on that as well during a person's career. So, excellent question. Yes? How recent was that training? Well, I've only been here 2 years, so I want to say that's been several years. So I want to say probably about 8 or 10 years ago that became part of the academy curriculum. So, other questions? How fast do those chargers go? Yes.
What type of people do you hire for that 75-person fingerprint team you're talking about?
That's an excellent question. So that just happens to be our basic entry-level person. So anybody with basically clerical type skills, administrative type skills, they can come in without a college degree and apply for those jobs. Now there are lowest paid jobs. Of course, they're very, I would say they're fairly mundane, same thing every day, going through categorizing information and making sure it gets entered properly. But it's a very important job. So you're talking, $15 an hour job, and a lot of times that's at entry level where someone will come in, start out at that job, and then gain some experience, and then move into a more technical job like a crime analyst, or sometimes even a scientist. So sometimes people, while they're going to school, will come in at an entry level job like that, and then move on to something higher. So great question though. Yes, ma'am. Well, I'll give you a lawyer's answer. It depends. It really depends on the nature of the evidence, the type of evidence, how much analysis they have to go through. So let's just take a bullet. Say you recover a bullet. Well, what medium was that bullet in? Was it in wood? Was it in glass? Was it in a body? So it really depends on the condition of it. So can they categorize it based on the NIBIN system, which is this national incident system where they look at all ballistics. And if the bullet is intact and if it's identifiable, they could match it against other bullets in a database from across the country and say, hey, this same gun was used in a shooting in another town, right? So let's take an easy one. A fingerprint, if it's an identifiable fingerprint lifted from a scene, that's 10 minutes, okay? If it's DNA, that's several weeks, depending on, again, the nature of the evidence. If they have to extract it from another substance or another solution. And so now we're getting really technical, like way over here, okay? So if it's a homicide case, obviously it moves right to the top of the list. We have somebody in custody, we have to get them charged within a certain period of time. So that kind of speeds up the process too. So, but it's an excellent question. On TV, it's all done by 8:30, okay? But we unfortunately don't get to operate with those kind of timelines. Yes?
Another question about that. Like, how closely do patrol officers and then detectives and attorneys work together? Like, obviously, like on Law and Order, the detectives are constantly meeting with the DA. Like, is
Right.
that how it really works?
Well, so the question was, first of all, is it like Law and Order? No. But do we work together with the prosecutors and the detectives? Absolutely. So oftentimes, so we have lawyers who advise our team on certain procedures. So we have lawyers who work for the State Patrol who they may get a call at 2 in the morning and say, hey, I have this thing, and usually it's something unusual, you know, that they haven't dealt with before. And so they would ask for advice from our lawyer, and they would say, okay, and she's our chief attorney. She's primarily looking out for, number one, the welfare of the agency in terms of risk management, and of course watching out for the welfare of the individual officer so that they don't get themselves outside of the bounds of qualified immunity. Like if you totally go off the rails on a decision, you may be exposed to liability. Okay, so those are the things that our attorneys are looking at. But fortunately, she was a prosecutor before she came to work for us, so she also knows criminal law. So she'll be able to give the officers guidance, like literally from the crime scene. Okay, so now typically the next day, or if it's a weekend, Monday, those folks will be in touch with the prosecutor. So in our case, it would be the county attorney, depending on which county you're in. And they'll be say, hey, we have this issue, and so how would you like to proceed so that we can get all the information to you in the right format so that you can demonstrate the elements of the crime so that the person can be charged with the right thing. So lots of teamwork. We don't always have the meetings where the DA is pounding on the desk and yelling at the cops, you know. That does happen sometimes, but not quite like Law and Order. But yeah, it's back to teamwork. So we have the patrol officers who respond to the scene, the investigators who are doing the follow-up, typically doing the interviews, and then of course the prosecutor saying, hey, don't forget about this step and don't forget about that step. So all working together to bring about the right outcomes. Yes, ma'am.
If you had, like, say, a homicide scene that you were going to, how would you go about collecting and preserving evidence?
Oh, great question. How do we collect and preserve evidence at a homicide scene? It depends. So is it inside or is it outside? Or is it both? Sometimes you have evidence in a variety of environmental conditions that have to be preserved. Excuse me, we were chatting before about the homicide that I investigated many years ago where the remains of the body were found outdoors. And so we had a forensic anthropologist come and help us kind of recreate that crime scene in terms of recovering. At that time was just, unfortunately, just bones. But we had to protect that scene, so we had the world's biggest tent. And we had to heat it because it was bad weather, and it was raining, and we had to make sure that the scientists had everything they need in that enclosed environment to gather all that evidence, and that was a several-day process. If it's indoors, it's a little easier, but you have to make sure that you're collecting, you know, every drop of blood that you can identify. If it's a weapon involved, you have to make sure, you know, you might say, oh, the person appears to be stabbed, there's a knife, it has blood on it, that's my weapon. Maybe not. Maybe it was different. You know, so we can't make assumptions. Our job is to gather as much evidence as we can, even things that might be exculpatory, because not only is it our job to prove who did it, but it's also our job to prove who didn't do it. And you see a lot of troublesome cases in our history where cops, well-meaning, jump to conclusions. Well, there's a body, there's a guy, there's a knife. Oh, that guy must have stabbed that guy. Case closed. Doesn't always work that way, okay? So we have to do our due diligence. It's really important because the worst thing that can happen to the entire criminal justice system is you prosecute the wrong person and they get convicted. And we see stories like that all the time. What it does is it shakes the confidence of the public in law enforcement. And that can't happen because we get our authority as police officers from the public. If the public lacks trust in what we're doing, we got a serious problem. And that's something we've wrestled with over the years, and I believe we're making positive momentum on that. But I would also argue, in defense of what I think is a noble industry, is that we cherry pick some of those cases which are bad and had bad outcomes, and we broad brush and we say, see, law enforcement is screwed up, and those folks don't have the best interests of the community in mind, and we somehow start chipping away at the edges of it, and we undermine it, and we use those several bad cases as proof. But if you look at the numbers of cases where that happens, I would suggest that it's a very, very small minority. But it's important that in our training, in our procedures, we do it properly so that we don't want to be the YouTube star or the front page headline of the agency who screwed up that case and wrongfully convicted somebody. Sir? Yes. Yes. Next question. Yeah, recruiting and retention in law enforcement right now is very challenging, and that's universal. That's statewide. In fact, actually in Canada, it's the same issue. So it may even be I won't say it's global, but certainly North America, certainly here in the States. But we have some headwinds. Number one, 3% unemployment. Okay? That's a good thing, but it's a challenging thing because you're a young man or young woman coming out of college or coming out of the military, and you get off the bus, literally, and there's 20 people there waiting to offer you a job, right? So private industry has really got this down, right? Google, Facebook, Microsoft, you name the dirty dozen, right? They're there at your military graduation. They're here, right? They're probably on campus today. They're probably right outside the door right now, right? But they're looking for the best and brightest to come into private industry. So you have many choices right now. Someday the economy will not be great, and we will have more applicants than we know what to do with. When I started in 1986, we were coming out of a recession at that time, and everything that I learned in college was apply for every job you can get your hands on, and maybe you'll get lucky and get hired, because it was really challenging. So I went to my hometown of Maple Grove, Minnesota, beautiful suburb of Minneapolis out in the West End there, and I applied, and there was 300 people in an auditorium like this taking the test for one vacancy. I got hired, so I got lucky. But I had worked for the city. I was a lifeguard. I was a swimming instructor. And I heard later, after I got hired, that the director of Park and Rec went to the police chief and said, you better hire that kid. So I didn't learn about that until after I was hired. So I sent her a nice Christmas card and a thank you after that. But that's how it was back then. And you talk to our colleagues here in the State Patrol, 1,200 applications, even 10 years ago, no problem. Right now, for every posting, we get about 150 applicants, and we're hiring 10%. So the hiring process very much weeds out a lot of people. So let's talk about that real quickly. So whether it's our agency or another agency, the things that trip people up, background, background, background. Sometimes decisions that you make as a young person follow you and have implications. As a parent, of course I call them the kids I used to have because they're all grown up now, but we always talk to our kids about decisions you make can have lifelong impacts. And I would say that to any young person. In fact, I'm always on that bandwagon. We know people make mistakes, right? Okay, who's perfect here? Nobody. I certainly made some dumb decisions when I was young, and we get that. So we're not going to try to hire perfect people, but we do have to hire honest people because that's that credibility and trust thing that we talked about. So what happens is, I'll tell you all the secrets. You fill out the 700-question personal history statement. Have you used drugs? When did you use them? When did you stop using them? Blah, 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 all that stuff, right? It happens, okay? When did the last time you smoked marijuana? If the answer was last Thursday, you might have a problem. If I tried it a couple times when I was in high school or whatever, it happens. That's not going to disqualify you, okay? But what happens is people say one answer here, and then they get over here and they have an interview with the psychologist to make sure that you're mentally fit for the job, and you give a different answer, okay? disqualified. Or you get to the polygraph, okay? And we say, we've answered all these questions, no, 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 no. You get to the polygraph, yes, okay, disqualified. So that's what gets most people. Not imperfections, because everybody has imperfections, but we have to have honesty. Sometimes on the physical fitness, some folks aren't prepared. You don't have to be a Navy SEAL, but you have to be able to run and jump and do things and be physically active. That's part of the job. So sometimes folks come in not prepared for that. And then some folks just, sometimes, believe it or not, law enforcement attracts some of the wrong people. People who like power, authority. You've probably met some of them, okay? Those aren't the people we're looking for. We want people who are servants, number one, and who really have the right view of this job, this awesome responsibility that we have, and who will not abuse that authority. So that's really important. So, and how are we doing on time? We're getting there? I'm supposed to be monitoring that. Right? Okay. We have time for some more questions. Who's got a stumper? Yes, ma'am. Yes. Excellent question. So her question was, are there some, I'll paraphrase it for you, are there some elements or demographics within our industry who are resistant to the officer wellness? Yes. And it's people like me. Not me in specific, but people who did not grow up with that. So if you started 30 years ago, that's just a new normal. So our more seasoned, because I learned that you get in trouble from HR if you talk about age, right? So you have our more mature folks are still resistant to it. If you have somebody who started in the last 10 years, it's normal. And so you have those folks, and that has no boundaries in and this is probably not scientific, but just in my experience, gender, racial, doesn't matter. If you started in the last 10 years, you've come to accept those wellness strategies as a normal part of the game. If you want to read a fast and fun book, there's a book written by Dr. Kevin Gilmartin called Emotional Survival for Law Enforcement. And he wrote that book about 15 years ago. So that's, it's been out there for a while, but the guy is hilarious. He's out of Phoenix, and he was a cop, became a psychologist, made some observations about law enforcement agencies and culture, and wrote this book on just kind of the perception and the reality. So it's a quick read, and you'll laugh, you'll cry. It's a good book. So, and when I was a police chief in a small town, I gave it to every officer in my agency. Now I think they actually read it in the academy. I think it's one of the required readings. So, but great question. Thank you. Excellent question. Yes. So that's part of the academy too, is recognizing not only cognitive disabilities in people, but medical disabilities. Because somebody who's having a diabetic seizure or a diabetic reaction may act just like a drunk driver, right? And then you give them a PBT and they come up with a 0, and you're like, oh, they must be on drugs, right? Remember the homicide scene, the guy and the knife? Well, that guy must have stabbed that guy, right? It's really important we look at the totality of the circumstances, we slow down a little bit. We don't get paid by the number of jobs we do in a shift, right? We get paid by doing all those jobs right, okay? So you might have to discern, maybe this person's having a medical challenge. It could be a stroke, could be a diabetes-related illness, or it could be a cognitive disability, you know? You're yelling at a person, you know, put up your hands, and it's not connecting. So obviously this person's a defiant person who wants to fight, right? If we jump to that conclusion, it is going to be a bad day for a lot of people. So we have to really be aware of our surroundings, look for the clues, and we do train on that. Because again, 30 years ago, here's what I was taught in the academy. There are yes people, there are no people, and there are maybe people. You turn maybe people into yes people, okay? And the no person, he just goes to the ground and gets handcuffed, all right? That's what I was taught. And then the reality of the street hits. I'm like, yeah, that's not the real world. So our evolution in training, and even the neurosciences are informing us of, what we're thinking, what we're seeing might not always be the full picture. And it's all happening in real-time speed. We don't get the slow motion replay like on the NFL, right? So you have to make decisions quickly, and that's part of the training. And that's where we want to hire people who aren't quick to make decisions and draw conclusions that aren't necessarily there. So if I haven't talked to any of you out of law enforcement as a career yet, keep asking questions. I'll get you there, right? It's a challenging career, but it's also very rewarding. If you watch our social media, you look at our Twitter, Facebook, there's always people throwing darts at us, but that's the nature of social media, right? But sometimes there's a lot of fun, interesting life stuff that we get to experience. Like the little kid, who saw the video with the little kid was talking to the trooper about Frozen? Anybody see that on Facebook? Yeah. I was like, really? That thing went viral in about a minute, because the trooper had a little kid same age as the little girl, and she was scared because she was in a crash. And he's like, hey, is that an Elsa doll? Bam, kid lit up like that, So for me, it was Lion King back in the day, but you guys probably don't remember that one. But, I watched that thing 30 times a week, I swear. So, all right, any other questions? Okay, how about we end on a lighthearted note? Okay.
Where do you see future law enforcement? 20, 30, 10 years?
Oh, yeah. The future of law enforcement. I'm an optimist, right? So this whole us versus them thing that has kind of really, I think, taken off in the last 10 years, I think that's going to go away. I think people are going to not rely necessarily on social media for their opinions as much, because I think we're getting a little worn out from all the negativity. I think we're going to start seeing things more for what they are. I think police-community relations will improve. I think technology, what we don't see today, who would have thought that we're going to have drones launching from the back of cop cars to go and video crime scenes and stuff? I mean, that's happening. Chula Vista, California, very close to where I used to live, they're sending drones out to look at the scene before they send the cops as a way to prioritize and triage. So I'm not going to send 2 cops to a neighborhood disturbance if it's just kids playing basketball too loud, right? So they're actually sending out drones and going, okay, now that's not a big deal. We're not sending somebody. Or that's a big deal, send everybody, right? They're doing that right now. These are people I used to work with. So I never thought I'd see that. But there's some things that are happening and will happen in the next 10 years technology-wise that'll make our job easier, and it'll make it more challenging. Like the thing we talked about with privacy and technology. So I think we're still going to hire great men and women who want to serve their communities. That's not going to change. I mean, the heart of a servant, that doesn't change. There's always people, there are people who are gravitated toward technical fields, and there are people who are gravitating toward people fields, and this is a people job, and that's not going to change. So, and there'll be things that I'll be surprised by. Of course, I'll be out of the business in 10 years. I'll be fishing somewhere, so great. All right, we have one more, and then I'll close with one more quick video. Because, I believe, any more last alibis? Okay, so we'll do this one. I always believe you should have fun at work and try to create an environment where it's fun, because we spend enough time there. So here's some jokers that took it to the extreme.
Kid, damn it, it's a blowout. 4 minutes. Time me.
Actually, the lieutenant colonel loved them. He always saw himself in the pits of the Indianapolis Speedway in the 500.
Trooper, why don't you go help the lieutenant colonel?
Really? Can I?
Yeah, yep.
10-4.
Now watch the traffic there.
Okay, 10-4.
It was the first time that it had been suggested that I go help my lieutenant colonel with anything.
What are you doing here?
The sergeant said I should help.
Really? Okay. All right. Here. Hold this. No. Not like that. Not like that. Like that. Like this.
Okay.
Hold it like that.
Okay.
I want to put the nuts in.
Okay.
Okay. All right. We got it.
Oh, for one brief moment I saw all the bolts silhouetted against the lights of the traffic, and then they were gone.
Oh. Fudge.
Only I didn't say fudge. I said the word, the big one, the queen mother of dirty words, the F dash 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 word.
What did you say? That's what I thought you said. Just go get in the car.
It was all over. I was dead. What would it be? The guillotine? Hanging? The chair? Internal affairs? Huh. Mere child's play compared to what surely awaited me.
Everything go okay?
What?
8 minutes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, do you know what your trooper just said?
No.
Well, I'll tell you what your trooper just said. Trooper?
Trooper! Ah!
Over the years, I got to be quite a connoisseur of soap.
Okay, who saw that one on social media? You guys didn't see that? You get the reference, right? Christmas Story, that's a scene right out of there. So if you knew these jokers those are actual troopers, they're not actors, believe it or not. But if you knew those characters, it was pretty fun. So you gotta not take yourself too seriously, have a little fun at work, and enjoy serving the public, because it's really it's a great honor. So thanks for coming today, and I guess I'm sticking around for punch and cookies, and be happy
Thanks
to
for coming, and we got punch and cookies across the
Okay.
hallway.
Thank you.